I'd like to welcome and introduce my fantastic panel today with a broad range of experience on the African continent and beyond. First, we have Dustin Chick, partner and managing director of Razor PR in South Africa, Provoke's current African Consultancy of the Year. Welcome, Dustin. We have Kwame Sanu, senior vice president of Opinion and Public BCW in Ivory Coast. Sarah Gooding, Managing Director of We Communications in South Africa, Global Privacy, Data Protection and Compliance Expert Adi Kola, who's worked extensively on Europe's data privacy framework, GDPR. Tom Manners, who's CEO of Clockwork in South Africa with all the guitars, our Provoke Media African of the Agency of the Year for 2021. And Kamal Taibi, founder and CEO of Stratius Group in Morocco, which introduced data legislation some years ago. So he'll be able to share his experience there. Welcome everybody, and thanks so much for being here. Dustin, I'm going to come to you first. Can you give us some background to this issue and why it's significant that we're having this conversation on the 1st of July?
Maja, today is 1 year since data and privacy legislation became law here in South Africa. It was promulgated to be effective of the 1st of July 2021, and it was a little bit of a watershed moment actually for us as an industry. I think there were multiple degrees of oh my goodness, this has just happened now, versus realizing that there was kind of level of complexity that lived for both ourselves and our clients. And I think 1 year later, it's quite interesting to look back and go, how much of that was a real issue, how much of that was an issue that we thought was going to be an issue, and how much of that has translated actually to the changes in how we work as agencies and how we work with our clients in terms of data.
And how is this playing out in your experience after all those kind of early fears?
So I guess the early days were I guess moments of extremes. The two extremes were PR agencies in the most traditional sense of the word asking themselves questions like, how do we manage media lists where we sit with data of journalists, and is that really considered to be in the public domain, or do we need to go to every journalist on a media list and ask their permission to be on our media list? And what does that mean for us as a license to operate requirement as agencies and the work that we promise our clients and we charge our clients for the work we do? It also blurred the lines a little bit between what often felt like an issue for the brands we worked for became our issue. So it was about how we were securing data and managing data. And I guess the biggest shift was seeing this, and I don't want to say a problem, this opportunity to look at data as something that we needed our house to be in order for, but also how we could work with our clients to do the job we really do for them, which is protect and manage their reputations, and making sure that those things live together. And I think 12 months later, what we've learned is it's not so bad out there. There is a lot that we can do and should do and still can do.
Thanks, Dustin. I'll come to the rest of the panel with just a brief overview of what your experience has been of how the new regulations are actually playing out for you and your work and for your clients. Kwame, do you want to go first on that one?
Yes, I mean, we are placed in a particular position because we work mostly with clients based in South Africa and Europe, which put us in a position of dealing with three regulations, the new POPI Act, the GDPR, and the local regulation itself. And increasingly what we see is that the responsibility of legally collected data now rests with the agency when we work with clients. And it's required to upskill internally and to also be aware and conscious of that, definitely. And again, it goes beyond what we do locally because we have to be mindful of GDPR and POPI Act in the case of South Africa-based clients.
So you're juggling three different sets of regulations there, not just the one. This is getting complicated, isn't it? Kamal, what's your experience been so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I double down on what Kwame said. We in Morocco specifically, as Kwame, we deal with clients for the region, Northwest Africa, so it means from Tunisia to Côte d'Ivoire, where Kwame is based. So we cover this region with different levels of constraints on data privacy and also on different level of advancement in legislation. For example, Morocco has been one of the first countries in Africa to be very constrained to companies from around the world coming in and being active in Morocco. So the license of operate, at the beginning, it was really a quite different experience for international players because, you know, international clients are tending to be less staffed to deal with such matters for less developed countries. So there reside our opportunity and also the issues for the clients. So we've been there to manage somehow. And about my experience in Morocco, the legislature, the commission, the National Commission was very, very publicized here because they started naming and shaming international big tech companies, you know, GAFAM. Big part of that has been named and shamed in Morocco and on international scene by the Moroccan Commission, and that had set a little bit the tone in how to deal with less developed countries in terms of data protection legislation, and that has been a very high signal to local and international clients to say, hey guys, you need to straighten your things up. To keep your license to operate in Morocco, and I can give more examples later in the discussion.
Yeah, I'll come back to you, Kamal, about your observations from what's been going on in Morocco. Tom, how's this played out for you over the past year or so?
Yeah, I think it forced us to look inward at the structure of the agency from a data perspective. You know, as Kwame said, you know, Clockwork's quite similar in that we deal with clients across the African continent and in Europe and in the UK. So also having to juggle multiple sets of legislation. And I think the biggest change was, as I mentioned earlier, having to look at our own infrastructure and the way that we were doing things and make some adaptations to that. And that's at a macro and a micro level. So, you know, literally from IT infrastructure for the entire business down to how we're treating media lists and how we're engaging with the data that we host and carry on behalf of our clients. And so fortunately for us, it wasn't a massive shift, but it did force us to step up and really kind of consider this quite seriously. And yeah, a year later, you know, it hasn't been particularly uncomfortable. It's been fairly easy, but it's definitely shone a light on some of the risks that are associated with privacy and yeah, and handling data.
Yeah, we'll come and talk a lot more about risk later on in the conversation. Ardi, what's your experience been like over the past year?
Well, it's really interesting listening to my fellow panelists talking about the importance of data, because as we know, we've been in PR for forever. And of course, data is driving all our programs. And what we've been forced to do is think about how we manage it. And one of the things which I think all of us have recognized is that we don't own the data on the database. That personal data belongs to the individual whose data it is. So there's a bit of a gear shift in thinking about what do we do as a controller or as a processor. And we could be both. We could be controlling the data, as we've heard, with lists, or we could be processing it on behalf of clients. It becomes more complicated when we've got data flows, international data flows, because all of us on this panel are doing work internationally. So it's not just one jurisdiction that we have to comply with. There are several jurisdictions. If you take a step back and think about what's important here, clearly the principles behind all of these jurisdictions are pretty much the same, including the one in South Africa, where transparency and accountability are two of the most important things we need to think about. So being transparent and accountable has to sort of permeate our thinking in terms of how we manage data. I don't think it's difficult. We can overcomplicate this. I mean, I have a legal and PR background, so I'm a bit fortunate to be able to understand what you need to do. But if we boil it down to simple terms, and Dustin already said this, it comes down to managing reputation. So you wouldn't do things if it would damage your reputation, whether that be a brand or individual or organizational reputation. So I think there's a very common sense approach that everyone can take watching this webinar, which will keep them out of trouble. It's when you stop to think about what it is you're doing that the trouble really starts.
Okay, that's that's more complex than I was expecting you to say. Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we think back to 1st of July, 2021, I think it's definitely fair to say that there was a bit of a scramble and a bit of a panic whilst everybody was trying to ascertain what it meant for them, from brands to, you know, the corporates and customers that we have, as well as how we play out as an agency. And to my fellow panelists, points, we very much had to look internally at our systems. But I think over the course of the year, we've definitely seen a shift, and consumers are definitely becoming more sophisticated and informed in terms of their understanding of how brands collect and use their data. But at the same time, there's this sort of reluctance around surrendering certain parts of their data privacy. And it's absolutely essential if they want to participate in certain elements, and you know, whether it's to deal with certain apps or whatever it may be. So I think the shift in the data privacy landscape, we're seeing consumers are feeling quite overwhelmed at times. There's a fine line between uncomfortable, unethical. Will they trade convenience for psychological safety? Sharing personal data is a requirement to access many digital services, but I think people often feel that they sort of have to do so, versus they'd really prefer not to, you know. So I think it's a tricky one. But it definitely has sort of forced us to improve processes and systems, and it's an interesting space.
Sarah, I'll come back to you later, because I know you've got some stuff you want to talk about research you've done into consumers' expectations of how brands manage that data. So we can talk about that later. Adi, I'm going to come back to you now. You've got an awful lot of experience looking at these kinds of bits of regulation and in various jurisdictions. What lessons do you think can be learned from markets where data privacy legislation has been introduced already?
Well, pretty much data privacy legislation is pretty much in every market. It's depending on its maturity. And I guess talking from the UK, we've probably got one of the longest traditions of data protection and privacy in Europe. We've certainly got the largest regulatory authority in Europe, in fact, the world. So if you're looking for a job in regulation, come to the UK. I think there are lots of, it's a great question, what are the lessons that can be learned? I think I was just thinking about it before we came on air, if you like. I think the first thing, and I hope I'm not repeating what everyone else is going to say later, so I'm trying to keep this short. The first thing is to understand what your data flows are. You've really got to understand where you are transferring personal data. Remember, the data protection laws that we're talking about and privacy laws refer to personal data. We're not talking about financial or statistical information. That could be covered by duties of confidentiality and all that kind of stuff, which is not really part of this webinar. We're really talking about personal data, stuff that can identify an individual, their behavior, how they think, their attitudes, their values, their perceptions, their beliefs, their behaviors, that kind of that granularity of information. So think about where that data is going, how it's going. And then the next thing in terms of the learning point is understand the purposes for processing that data. Interestingly, and I edit the Journal of Data Protection and Privacy, and one of the things that people miss is that if you can avoid processing personal data, irrespective of where you are in the world, then you really need to think about how you can avoid it, because you're only asking for trouble if you're starting to process personal data. As we've heard, it can be very expensive. You have to change your systems. You have to even change your thinking. If you can avoid processing personal data, take it if you can. And one of the ways of doing that, again, not to get into great details, to anonymize data, collecting data, anonymizing it, stripping away anything which can identify an individual. That's pretty safe. So think about the flows, think about the purposes. And then I guess the third point to think about is, what is your legal basis? What is the legal basis for processing that data? If you miss that, you're in trouble. And many jurisdictions have what's known as derogations. In other words, exceptions to the general rule. So if you're in PR and you're processing the data of a journalist, well, do you know what? You should be fine, because they're in the business of getting stories. You're in the business of giving them stories. Why would you not want to process each other's data on the basis of that? That's why you guys exist. So don't worry, don't overthink this. Don't be too scared in terms of the headlines you read about fines and sanctions. That, you know, those are effectively rare events for people outside of the PR agency world. There will be PR agencies that get fined and sanctioned. I get that, but in reality, it's a very, very small number. And the other point, which I'll come on to later, is think about what you can do with data, how you can do it more rather than less. And that's about deepening digital trust. And maybe I'll stop there and we can come back to that later if that sounds interesting.
Yeah, it does. I definitely will come back to you on that one. Kamal, do you want to, you touched a little bit on your experience in Morocco. What have your observations been?
Yeah, thanks. Well, our experience into that, I mean, it was not so surprising for us as a firm, because we've been, let's say, monitoring for a major client on these aspects in the region. And so when we needed to specifically, not on the media side, but specifically for a project that we do, and we work with a major client, and we have something like 7,000 people, personal data to protect and to work with. We have been quite agile, and we had already the right connections with experts to apply those, let's say, regulations inside the firm, but also to be compliant with the law in treating with the National Commission on Privacy. So it was this agility of, let's say, firms in communications is quite important, I think. And as Ardi said, we don't overcomplicate, but we needed this agility to work with the National Commission. On the contrary, clients had more, let's say, organizations had more issues on that stuff, because they have been a bit surprised and couldn't adapt quickly, and sometimes acted without being compliant for, let's say, some of them very long time. And as the Commission in Morocco has been quite vocal about it, they started, let's say, to adapt and calling out experts to adapt. Yeah.
And Kwame, you touched a little bit on your experience in Francophone Africa and Côte d'Ivoire earlier. Tell us a bit more about your observations there.
I mean, I was happy hearing Adi talking about how extensive is data regulation in UK, but here, obviously, most countries follow the French legislation pre-GDPR and adopted the same regulatory agency. But what we've seen is that there is little or no awareness of what data privacy is. Where we have our global client from Europe or from SA being very keen on data privacy and whatever regulation is around, locally, we can see that the local brands are not aware, they're not even understanding that there are regulations, and we still collect data offline, because usually when they talk about data privacy, everybody look at online, but we do collect a lot of data from experience, activation, and those kind of stuff, especially in brand communication. So we have to educate them now. We are now the advocate. You would get into trouble if you don't do that. And it's quite interesting to see that. And one also surprising fact that we've seen in this region, especially because we work with telco, is that the outsized power of states plays out, and sometimes the government, without following due process, would now require private personal data, putting our telco client at risk on one hand, they can't refuse because their license to operate depends on the government. But on the other side, they can be in trouble, especially if people go to court. So it's kind of a fine line to balance. And also clients are now pushing the data issue to us. And I don't think we are equipped or we have the size of their legal or expert pool. And it's coming as a new cost for agencies. It's coming as a new expertise. And what we've done is simple. We've outsourced. We call out experts who can help us navigate it. And I think what we would always look at going forward is how we can navigate these needs for data, this low awareness from our local clients, and the existing regulation and regulatory agency.
That sounds like a really tricky balance to get right, Kwame. Dustin, I'm going to come back to you. For you, what are the main challenges, but the opportunities of what's going on with data privacy legislation?
I think it's something really simple: do the right thing. And I think when you start to live by that as a very clear value on how you approach both the requirements for yourselves inside an agency, as well as the work and the counsel that you provide your clients, it really gives you a very clear, I guess, path forward on what you need to do inside the agency, doing the right thing. Do our checks and balances exist? Is our IT infrastructure what it needs to be? Are our people appropriately trained? Do the right thing. For our clients, have we listened, monitored, and flagged the right risks? Have we helped them be prepared to managing those risks? We don't have crystal balls. We're never going to know everything that may or may not happen, but we can be, I guess, that analogy that says prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And I think just by using that as a really, I guess, powerful North Star, it becomes quite a simple thing to manage, actually, because the basis of engagement, whoever you engage, inside or outside of your business or a client, says, this is my motivation for what I'm trying to achieve, and I'm not trying to cut any corners, and I'm not trying to not do the right thing, I guess. And I think it makes it actually a relatively simple thing.
And it comes back to the point Ardi made earlier, that there's a lot of common sense here, isn't there?
Yeah, completely.
Tom, I'm going to come to you next. I know you want to talk about the threats that PR agencies of all sizes are facing from a cybersecurity perspective and how that might impact data integrity for clients.
Yeah, I think increasingly PR agencies are doing work or engaging with clients' data or collecting data on behalf of clients via social apps or digital platforms. And I mean, I think every organization around the world faces the same reality that, we're getting hit by hackers and cyber threats daily. And increasingly what we've seen at Clockwork is that the agency will be used as a backdoor into a client system. And that is a tremendous threat, not only to the client itself, but often, contractually speaking, and it's often hidden away, but that's grounds for immediate termination of the contract. And so there is a real monetary risk associated with not having proper training and proper data infrastructure in place, because the reality is that, as an agency, you are going to get hit and you are going to be seen as a soft target or a potential entry point into large blue chip companies. And it happens all the time. And it's a concern. It's a concern, I think, for the industry. I think digital agencies have always been quite strong at this. And I wonder, whether the PR, the PR fraternity at large is taking this as seriously as it needs to be taken, because it is a major risk.
So tell me a little bit more about what you've experienced in terms of those threats and risks to the business.
Yeah, I mean, I can't name the client in particular, but we do work with a lot of large blue chip organizations around the globe, and part of our mandates is to handle digital platforms for them as part of our sort of larger influencer and social work that we do on their behalf. And in the last year alone, we've had 4 or 5 attacks that have made an attempt at entering the client's infrastructure via our own. Fortunately, we've been able to, fend them all off, but it's a reality. It happens all the time.
On that influencer piece, Tom, that's a key strand of everyone's work now, right? What responsibility do comms practitioners have from a data integrity point of view when it comes to working with influencers, and what's your advice to brands on when it comes to data privacy with the partners they're working with in the influencer space?
Yeah, I think it's common sense again. It's I don't think it's critical not to get too wound up, I think, in this issue. Common sense always prevails. I think proper vetting of influencers is critical. Making sure they're briefed properly is critical. Making sure that they understand the responsibility that they hold as custodians for a brand in a campaign from a data privacy point of view. And then obviously, if collecting data via an influencer or holding an influencer's data is part of the process, then it needs to be very, very clearly outlined from the beginning that is the expectation. And the influencer or brand custodian needs to understand that. So again, just common sense.
Okay, coming back to Mr. Common Sense, RD, you mentioned at the end of the
typing an answer to a question. Then sorry, carry on.
Mr. Common Sense. I know you mentioned earlier you had some thoughts about how to actually deepen digital trust so you could do more rather than less than data. Can you expand on that a little bit for us?
I think the entry point for people when they're thinking about data protection and privacy it tends to be the wrong entry point. I'm not speaking on behalf of my fellow panelists. And the entry point that most people think about is sanctions and fines. That isn't the entry point. The entry point is what you're going to do with data, personal data. How can you do more, not less with it? And what do you need to do to build digital trust? That's much more valuable than trying to avoid being sanctioned and fined, because frankly, that's not going to, as I say, keep the lights on in your agency. You have to grow your business. You have to engage with your clients. And I think there are a number of things that you can do. We've already heard some of that. I mean, it is common sense. I mean, clearly, if you're processing personal data, then let people know how you do that. And one of the things that I don't see happening, and it may be something of interest for people listening and watching and participating, is if you have taken steps to put in place organizational and technical measures to protect data and to mitigate risk, then why not tell the world that on your website? We call it in Europe a data protection impact assessment. Some people don't understand why they need to do that. Well, if you've done a data protection impact assessment, you've understood what the risks are. We don't live in a risk-free world, and no one, not even the regulators, believe you can't get rid of risk. But if you've understood what the risks are and you've taken technical and organizational measures to mitigate the harm that could cause, then publish it. It's actually a really good practice, and it gives that feel that I was talking about earlier about being transparent. It also shows that you're totally accountable. There's no longer any hiding place. You can't hide behind contracts and say, oh, actually, we're the agency, we had a contract. It's nothing to do with us, it's to do with someone else, because there's this kind of joint and several liability which permeates the thinking of everyone. We're all in this together. We can't hide behind contracts. You certainly can't hide behind legalese and legal gobbledygook, which I've read many times, and data privacy notices that go on for pages, not mentioning any names, Google. But lots of organizations have tried to get lawyers involved in it. Don't get the lawyers involved. Stick with the communications people. Do it in simple, ordinary language. Explain it clearly, and don't try to scare the life out of people either. And I think just being transparent, being accountable, maybe publishing what you've done to mitigate risk on your website is a good thing, not a bad thing. And if people get the idea that they can trust you, they'll share more, not less, with you.
That's a very good point, Dustin. I think you mentioned in one of our calls in advance of this session the importance, as Ardi said, of kind of running into the fire rather than hiding and taking a fear-based approach to legislation.
I completely agree, and I think the worst, and maybe I'm paraphrasing Ardi a little bit, but I think the worst thing that agencies could do is put their heads in the sand, say it's not me, or hide behind their contracts and say it's the client's problem, not mine. It even goes into some of the things that Tom was saying about influencers. Your legal agreement with influencers is not a defense for doing the wrong thing. And I think when you start to approach that running towards the fire, it doesn't mean that you're going to be burnt in the fire. It means that you can control the fire, as I really butcher that metaphor. And just understand that I think with the right orientation, you can start to solve those things. I completely agree with Adi when you say normal people speak. The worst thing you could do is involve the lawyers and make it even harder to understand, because it actually comes across like you're obfuscating. You're not actually communicating. And I think when you can sit and have that level of honest conversation, both inside ourselves as agencies and as businesses, and a lot of us form part of kind of bigger groups, and making sure that the right checks and balances are in place, but also how you take that to your clients. And in the spirit of partnership and being the solve, run towards the fire. You know, one of the things I think I suggested to you in advance, Maja, was, you know, it sounds like a really silly thing, but are we fire drilling with our clients for what it feels like when there's a data loss? Or and I think waiting for the moment the client phones you and says, I need a holding statement, is way too late to begin to plan. And I think it's just a large degree of pragmatism and openness and looking to solve the problem long before it's a problem.
Absolutely. It's like that integrity and transparency is obviously should be key to everything we're doing. Sarah, I know that if we look at the consumer's expectations rather than, you know, what this means for agencies, you guys have done quite a lot of research into how consumers expect brands to handle their data. What have the findings been?
Yeah, so Maja, at we've actually just recently completed a survey with global consumers around data privacy expectations and how these are changing rapidly. It's called the Privacy Mandate, and it showed really key insights in terms of consumers' attitude towards data privacy, and then how brand leaders need to have these conversations. So just some of the standouts was the fact that sort of data privacy, what it actually means. It means more than cybersecurity or protecting personal information. It's about the consumer's understanding of data policies and also their willing exchange of personal data for benefit. We saw that 65% of our respondents say that transparency is absolutely key, and they want more control around how their data is shared and used. So, you know, we say brands can no longer afford to stay quiet on data privacy issues. I think 9 out of the 10 global respondents will consider or stop doing business entirely with a brand based on its privacy and confidentiality policies, which is quite something. You know, so in terms of what can brands do around this, transparency being absolutely critical. They need to be clear about their intentions with personal data. Consumers are craving autonomy, and they said 82% of our respondents said that they want to choose how and when they give access to their data. And then they're demanding clarity. 91% of our customers will stop or reconsider doing business if they're not comfortable. So they really need to see the value of the exchange of data. And I think that's, you know, putting pressure on brands to be clear about those policies, to be clear about how the information is going to be used, and then ultimately what is the value to that consumer for giving up that info.
And Sarah, how much counsel are clients, including international corporates, requiring around data privacy? Is there an education piece here in terms of clients and consumers?
100%, a huge education piece, Maja. I think as brand custodians and communicators, we really need to sort of step in and see where we can make the difference. So around that education piece of data privacy, the fact that it means more than cybersecurity or protecting personal information, showcasing the policy side of things, over communicating with customers how their data is going to be collected and used to build that critical trust. We say if data privacy is a transaction, consumers need to know that it's a safe one. So the underlying message for any brand that collects and uses personal information is that you must do so, and you can trust us. We are going to respect this exchange. I think so. It's really important to build that trust. And then once a user has chosen how to share their personal data with a brand, that choice must be honored by the brand. Consumers are increasingly becoming sophisticated. So in terms of their usage practices, and they're not afraid to stop using brands. So it's absolutely brands, I think, that win in this privacy first age will do so by delivering benefits directly to the customer, and really understanding the value of that exchange.
Thanks,
I'll place the link to the report in the chat for those who want to access more.
That would be great. Thank you so much. I know there's tons of great data in there.
Yeah, there really is. So to keep it condensed.
Yeah, no, that was a great summary. Well done. It's a big report. I've got a question on digital images. I'm going to aim this at you, Tom, initially, but if anyone else has any comments, please do chime in. We now use digital imagery every day in our work. We've been looking at contact data now in this discussion. But what are the considerations and challenges around how we're managing digital images now with all the new data privacy legislation?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting space, and I think the conversation is largely being led, or I think held, by a lot of the social platforms, which are cracking down tremendously on privacy requirements around digital imagery. I think from a PR perspective or an agency perspective, there's two components to this. If we're collecting images or taking images at an event, for example, the expectation is that there's fair use, and you're engaging into an open, verbal contract, if you will, with the attendees, provided, of course, that you notify them that those images might be used on social or whatever happens to be. I think where the crux is, when that image is collected and hosted within your infrastructure, it's critical that that is treated like any other personal information would be, and it's properly encrypted, it's secure. There's a lot of instances where images will be lifted off of a website and used for harassment or fake accounts, for example, and we have to take responsibility as agencies if we're going to be using those images. So that's just the one side of it. Of course, there's fair use, and there's a whole aspect to it in terms of the legal availability of images more generally speaking. But I think when collecting images, as I mentioned earlier, at an event or something like that, it's totally okay. But I think it's important to be open about it, and then to make sure that those images are secure.
Yeah, transparency is coming through. It's a big theme today, isn't it? Tom, you mentioned earlier when we're talking about data breaches and stuff, that there's a level of investment here from agencies required to overcome the risks, and investment in security infrastructure. Does anyone else have any experience of actually having to put money into this to make sure that the data you're holding and that your security infrastructure is as tight as it can be? And has that changed over the past year or two?
I'm happy to give it sorry, Kamal or Kwame, you're welcome to go. I think it's not about additional investment. I think it's about maintaining investment, and looking, when you do those things, that you've invested in the right tools, the most effective tools, the right platforms, and that it's working. So I think it's just good business, and making sure that whatever investment you make is actually for the right reason.
Kamal, did you want to follow up on that one?
Yes, I think to your question straight, yes, we did have to invest. Unfortunately, it was on our accounts, not on the clients. The client was not that sensitive, especially it was like a big company, local. So we need to invest in expertise and also on IT infrastructure to secure data. But coming to what, sorry, oh, you're still hearing me. So, and also I just want to add something about RD's comment, do more, not less. For us, the investment was a good thing, because in starting working on that and securing the data and also being compliant, the client moved from a position to another. The first one was like a warning attitude, like, hey guys, be careful, you need to manage everything. We don't care about the problems. If anything is raised, and we doubled down on that, we secured this, and we've been compliant before the client itself on other programs. So that opened big eyes at the client side, especially in their compliance and legal departments. And that has secured for us, like since then, we quadrupled our business with the clients, because so this for me is a good investment. And then doubling down and do more, not less. I think, thank you, Ardi, for saying so. I think I'll share that with my team and spread it all over our clients. But this is really has been a good experience in doubling down on that.
Maja, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, yes. I mean, we went through a particular experience. The client sent us what will I call it? Is it an NDA or a non-responsibility document that we needed to sign? So in case of any breach, you are fully responsible. And it was a global client. We had no other choice than signing the document. So what it prompted automatically is that if they are making us signing this document, there may be a risk. And I think the IT team work on some stuff, especially because we work using cloud. We use a lot of cloud technology to power our agency IT system. So they had to change the licenses we're using, the whole security. I mean, we are PR people, we are not IT people, but we had to really understand and taking it seriously, because the client was like, basically, you are on your own. If there is, from the moment you sign this document, and I think it is also something we would need to look at as an industry, how we work out this kind of relationship with the client, and how the client can support in understanding the risk, especially because the core of our business is protecting and managing reputation, not fighting cybersecurity risk or enhancing threat. We felt a little bit abandoned by the client.
There's interestingly related to that, Kwame, there's a question that was that Ardi's answered briefly in the chat. How much responsibility do PR agencies have to ensure clients are compliant with these laws? Ardi, do you just want to expand a little bit on your answer there?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think we've kind of covered it already. I mean, I think I made the point earlier that there's no hiding place now. Even if we had a contract which said we're not responsible for any data breaches that may occur as a result of us acting for you, the court will decide whether we're responsible or not what's written in a piece of contract. And I think we have to be, if you like, have a shared destiny about this, as we used to say at Accenture, where I used to work. You know, our interest is to represent our clients and to protect their reputation, and that goes all the way through to how they do their business, how they process data, how we are processing data for them. If we took an example of that in practice, let's just quickly talk about the GDPR, although we haven't mentioned it lots, which is fine, by the way. But if we look at the GDPR, there is an article in GDPR which talks about the duties and the role of the data processor. And in many respects, many of you watching this or here today are data processors. You'll be data controllers in processing your staff's data and employee data and that kind of stuff. But for most of the time, you're going to be a data processor. And actually, you're measured and you're held accountable to the same standards as your clients. There's no lesser standard because you're a data processor. The ultimate responsibility is for the data controller. So in other words, when they hire you as a PR agency, they have to ask you, will you comply with the standards of the GDPR? And actually, it's not a tick box exercise anymore. It used to be. It's not anymore. You have to be able to answer that question rigorously. And what I mean by that is you have to be able to demonstrate you comply and verify you comply. It's no point saying, yes, we comply, move on. And how do you verify? Well, you might be thinking by watching this today, I wonder if there are things that we can do to demonstrate and verify how we take security of processing seriously. And it may be to think about, getting an ISO or if you're in the UK, British Standards certification. I did this when I was at Hitachi, and we became the first global company in the UK to get what was known as BS 10012 2017, which was a personal information management system standard. It was the first standard to be created in the wake of the GDPR. And it helped to turbocharge the business, because we were winning business because we could demonstrate that we complied with the security of processing requirements under the GDPR, because we had this mark, this standard, this certification. Have a think about that. It was great. It was great for PR, because in fact, the British Standards Institution in the UK made a film. They did it at their own cost, and that is on YouTube if you're interested.
Okay, I think we need to find that, and I think we need to put that in the chat, because I think we all want to see that video. Dustin, following on from that, do you think we should be subscribing to some sort of industry code of practice to bring all this together in terms of guidelines and benchmarks that address these needs on behalf of the PR industry specifically?
I definitely do, and I think it's and maybe I'm kind of beating the same drum over and over again, but I think it's about doing the right thing again. And I think an industry who's willing to hold itself to account already says a lot about how they will treat data. It says a lot about the respect that will come, the respect that comes to their clients, and how they will work with their clients to be, I guess, better. So I think it is less of an option and more of a necessity, actually, that as an industry, we should be holding ourselves to the right standards.
I've got one more question in the chat box here from Lindsay Ward. Any advice to small and startup agencies in navigating their way through this with little budget for extra support? Who would like to take that one? Somebody help. Okay.
Not to make it an advert, but I've helped agencies quite extensively. You don't have to spend a fortune. You don't probably need to employ someone on a full-time basis as a data protection officer, unless you are, of that size. And I think sometimes be careful who you choose. There's an awful lot of people out there who don't really understand privacy and data protection. They may have been in compliance, which is fine, by the way, but you have to have a broader view. And also ask people, do they understand how you achieve compliance, not just through a legalistic route, but by looking at business continuity, risk, and technology. One of the things I was doing when I was teaching at Henley Business School to the next generation of DPOs was thinking about, how do you achieve the outcomes that the regulatory authorities want you to achieve? They want you to be safer. They want the customers to be safe. They don't want their data to be misused or harm, damage, or distress caused as a result of that. But if you only just applied the law, you won't get there. Honestly, that isn't the way to do it. All the things we've been talking about today, about common sense, about thinking about reputation, doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, is possibly one of the strongest things that we can deliver today as a message, I think, as a group, because that will guide you, in terms of what you need to do. But think about looking at this through the three lenses of business continuity, doing what you're doing today and carrying on doing that tomorrow, risk, because everything we've been talking about, although we haven't really talked about this, is through the lens of risk. It's about making sure that we're not being risky. And then think about how technology can enable you to achieve those outcomes. If you're able to think in that way, and maybe you need someone just on a very modest basis to help navigate what you're doing, if you need that as a small or medium-sized agency, then find the right person, work with them, but ask them those questions. Because fundamentally, it's the reputation of the agency, it's the reputation of your clients, because that's going to help you grow. If you start screwing this stuff up, you're not going to be around for very long.
Ardy, I'm going to take that as your top tips and takeaways, because that was a very neat summing up of the whole dilemma.
One, but I'll save that for later.
No, chuck it in. Go on. You've got the floor.
I think that one of the things that really annoys me is, because I speak as a lawyer, is how awful the lawyers are when they get involved with PR agencies and they're talking about data. Always like you glaze over with boredom. So what I tended to do when I was speaking around the world on this is say to people, I put up a slide and it was from Planet of the Apes. And you're possibly thinking, what the hell has that got to do with what we're talking today? But bear with me. And I put up there, and the headline of that picture from the Planet of the Apes was "Creepy or Cool?" Question mark. If you're doing something which is creepy, it's unlikely to be lawful. But if it could be perceived as being cool, you're possibly going to be okay. You don't have to be a lawyer to work that one out.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to come to the rest of you as well with your top tips and takeaways to sum up what everybody watching needs to know about data privacy. Dustin, I'll come to you first.
I guess it's the theme I've had the whole day: do the right thing, and start today. Don't wait to do the right thing. I think it's the spirit of run towards the fire.
Great, thank you, Dustin. Kwame, what's your top tip or takeaway from today's session?
I think nobody can do better than what Dustin just said. Just have to do the right thing, and I think it can be a moral compass that we follow across different regulation and across different markets. Just make sure that in each market and in each regulation and with each audience, you're doing the right thing, both for you as agency and for the client, because it seems that client risk become usually agency risk as well. So thank you, Dustin. Do the right thing. Let's all do the right thing.
Kamal, what are your thoughts as we close?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think doing the right thing is the right thing to do, if I may say. But also, I think to international audiences, because we have more international clients coming into the market, is like, know your markets. You need to talk to local experts to know how to operate in local markets, small local markets. We are covering 10 countries, Northwest Africa, and this is like a web of different things to manage. So for clients, yeah, come to experts and talk to them. And I will finish with, again, RD's quote of the day: do more, not less, of the right thing.
There's a theme emerging here, isn't there? Tom?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think quite simple. Take it seriously, but don't freak out. Yeah, okay. It doesn't have to be more complex than that. We're all in the same boat together, and you know, the world's not going to end. The sun will shine tomorrow, but do take it seriously.
Okay, I kind of want you to put that into a song immediately with your guitars behind you, but okay, maybe not the time or the place. Sarah, what's your top tip?
Yeah, just quickly in a tweet, I would say to really kind of over communicate with customers, ensure transparency and clarity, re how the information is going to be used, and ensure you build that trust around them, and then that they see the value of what's in it for them. Will it mean more relevant marketing to them? Will it mean a more customized experience? So just keep those communication lines open, and that's what we do as communicators, over communicate.
That's what we do. That's what we do. Guys, thank you all so much. Dustin, Kwame, Kamal, Tom, Ardi, and Sarah. It's been an absolute pleasure talking through all these topics with you. I think we've got some very clear threads coming through. Do the right thing. Common sense needs to prevail. Look at opportunities rather than just threats when you're considering risk. Do more, not less, and double down. Do everything with transparency, integrity, and clear communications. And definitely look beyond the legislation and seeing this as a tick box exercise. Thank you all so much for your time today and your expertise.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maja. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Just a very quick point to end on. Thank you very much for that, Maja. It certainly feels like there's a bit of homework for us all to do. And on that note, when we do send around the notes after this session, there'll be some details and reports which were mentioned. Sarah reported the privacy mandate report, which we'll share around with everyone. And Ardi has really kindly put together quite a detailed overview of the state of data regulation in different parts of the world, and we'll include that too. And obviously this session will also be available on our YouTube channel as well. But I just, on behalf of the PRCA, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Dustin, Kwame, Sarah, Ardi, Tom, and Kamal, and of course Maja for presenting so brilliantly. We're really grateful for everyone's time, and we hope to see you all again very soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Corey.
Thank you very much. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.